On March 24, 2022, the FreeFall drop tower at Icon Park was operating as usual. The ride lifted passengers into the air before releasing them into a controlled drop. Tyre Sampson was among the riders that evening.
Kid that wanted to play football. When I heard about it.
Earlier that night, he had been turned away from other rides at the same location because he did not meet the safety requirements. On the FreeFall tower, he was allowed to board. After taking his seat, the over-the-shoulder restraint was lowered and locked. The system registered the seat as secure, and the ride began its ascent. When it reached the top, the ride paused briefly before entering freefall. During the descent, Tyre Sampson was no longer secured in his seat. He fell from the ride and was transported to a nearby hospital, where he died later that night. Tyre Sampson's size placed him outside the operating limits specified for the ride. He was approximately 6'5" and weighed around 340 pounds. The manufacturer's guidelines for the FreeFall tower listed a maximum rider weight of 286 pounds. Earlier that evening, this had already been enforced on other attractions. In those cases, the restraints could not be properly secured, and he was not allowed to ride. Those decisions were consistent with standard safety procedures. On the FreeFall tower, the outcome was different. The restraint system used on the ride consisted of an over-the-shoulder harness that locked into position. Each seat was equipped with a sensor designed to detect whether the restraint had been properly engaged. The ride could not begin unless all seats met this condition. In this case, the system indicated that the restraint was secure. There was no automatic stop or warning that prevented the ride from operating. The Orlando FreeFall tower was designed as a vertical drop ride with a maximum height of approximately 430 feet. Riders were seated in a circular arrangement of 30 seats, each fitted with an over-the-shoulder restraint. Once the ride cycle began, the seat ring was lifted to the top of the tower. At that height, the seats tilted forward, positioning riders at an angle facing downward. After a short pause, the release mechanism activated, and the ride entered a controlled free fall. During the descent, the ride reached speeds of around 75 miles per hour. Near the lower section of the tower, a magnetic braking system slowed the ride before it returned to the loading position. The safety of the ride depended on the restraint system maintaining a secure fit and the sensors accurately detecting that condition before and during operation. The FreeFall tower was designed so that it could not operate unless every restraint was properly secured. Each seat had to register as locked before the ride could begin, and the system relied on that confirmation to proceed with the cycle. In this case, those checks were completed, the restraint was locked, and the sensor indicated that it met the required condition. The ride was allowed to operate under normal parameters. But how the restraint system could register as secure when it did not hold the rider in place? Tyre Sampson was visiting Orlando as part of a football-related trip. He was described as an active teenager with an interest in continuing in the sport. On the evening of the incident, he went to Icon Park with others from the same group. Access to rides earlier that night had been limited due to size restrictions. Those decisions were based on whether the restraint systems could be properly secured. In those cases, the requirements were enforced. The FreeFall tower was the ride he was ultimately allowed to board. That decision placed him in a restraint system that depended on both a physical fit and a correct sensor reading to function safely during the ride cycle. The ride reaches the top of the tower, just over 430 feet above the ground. At that height, the seats tilt forward, positioning riders to face downward. There is a brief pause before the release system activates and the ride enters free fall. The seat ring accelerates downward, reaching speeds of approximately 75 miles per hour. The descent continues until the braking system begins to slow the ride near the lower section of the tower. It is during this phase that the failure occurs. Tyre Sampson is no longer held securely by the restraint. He moves downward within the seat and passes through the gap between the harness and the seat structure. He falls from the ride. The remaining riders stay secured, and the ride completes its programmed cycle, returning to the loading position without interruption. After the ride returns to the loading position, the situation becomes clear to operators and bystanders. Emergency services are contacted shortly after the incident is reported. First responders arrive at the scene and Tyre Sampson is transported to a nearby hospital. Despite medical efforts, he is pronounced dead later that night. The ride is shut down immediately following the incident. State authorities begin their investigation the next day. Inspectors from the Florida Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services arrive on site to examine the ride and secure relevant components, including the seat involved. The focus shifts from the operation of the ride itself to the condition of the restraint system. The investigation centers on the seat and restraint used during the ride. After the incident, inspectors find that the over-the-shoulder restraint is in a locked position. The system had registered the seat as secure before and during operation. Each seat on the ride includes a proximity sensor that determines whether the restraint is properly engaged. The ride is designed so that it cannot operate unless all seats meet this condition. In this case, the sensor indicated that the restraint was correctly positioned. Further examination reveals a difference in the physical opening of the restraint. Under normal conditions, the gap between the restraint and the seat is approximately 3.3 inches. In this case, the opening is measured at approximately 7.19 inches. The investigation determines that the sensor for that seat had been manually adjusted. This changed the threshold at which the system identified the restraint as secure. As a result, the ride was allowed to operate with a restraint position that did not meet its intended safety limits. The findings identify several contributing factors. The rider exceeded the specified weight limit of the ride. The restraint system was designed to function within a defined range, and that limit was not enforced in this instance. The proximity sensor associated with the seat had been modified, allowing the system to approve a restraint position outside normal operating conditions. The ride also relied on a single primary restraint, without an additional secondary system to provide redundancy. These factors combined to create a situation in which the system allowed the ride to operate under conditions that reduced the effectiveness of the restraint. The ride itself functioned as designed, but the conditions required for safe operation were not met. The FreeFall Tower was operated by the Slingshot Group, which manages multiple amusement attractions in the Orlando area. The company was responsible for the day-to-day operation of the ride, including staffing, maintenance, and adherence to safety procedures. Prior to this incident, there had been other safety-related events involving attractions operated by the same company. In 2020, a maintenance worker died after falling from the Starflyer ride at the same location. In 2021, a slingshot-style ride experienced a cable failure incident. These events were separate and involved different ride systems. However, they form part of the broader operational environment in which the FreeFall ride was managed. The investigation into the FreeFall incident remained focused on the specific technical and procedural issues identified in this case. Following the incident, Tyre Sampson's family filed a lawsuit against multiple parties associated with the ride. These included the operator of the attraction, the companies involved in its design and manufacture, and other entities connected to its installation and oversight. The claims focused on failures in safety procedures, including the modification of the restraint sensor and the decision to allow a rider who exceeded the specified limits to board the ride. Settlements were reached with some of the involved parties. The terms of these agreements were not publicly disclosed. Legal proceedings involving other parties continued, reflecting the number of organizations involved in the design, certification, and operation of the ride. The FreeFall drop tower did not return to operation after the incident. The ride was shut down immediately and remained closed throughout the investigation process. After the findings were released and public attention continued, the decision was made to remove the structure. The tower was dismantled in 2023. Icon Park remains open, but the FreeFall attraction is no longer part of the site.